Welcome to this edition of How to Publish Your Book with Deborah Aker and Becky Bain, and we have special guest Bob Wolf with us here today. He's a tax asset coach and tax strategist. Sorry about that. I know what you are. And I'm so glad to have the two of you here today to talk about Bob's book and his process of creating his book. Welcome, Bob.
Hi, ladies. Thank you for having me.
Sure. Anything you want to add, Becky, or shall I just go ahead?
Go ahead. I'm excited that he's here and that we can talk to him about this journey that he's been on.
Yeah. All right. So the cool thing, there are many cool things about Bob, and one of them that's related to writing books and authoring a book is that he's working on a trilogy of books, and he's about 50 to 75% of the way through. And we're going to focus on that a little bit later because we've taken a little bit of a different approach and he's taken a little bit of a different approach than a lot of authors do. And we thought that this would be really useful for the community to know about and to learn from. So we're going to start off with why bother writing a book? What was it that led you to wanting to write a book and to get your ideas out there?
Yeah. So for me, it was kind of, I think a lot of people have that dream or that desire at some point that, boy, wouldn't that be cool if I wrote a book? And so, but my response to that self-question was, well, what would you write about? What do you have to say? Right? You can't just write a book and be gobbledygook, but nowadays you probably could and do really well. But that was my goal is when writing a book was always something that I was excited to do. And then when I figured out what I wanted to write about, that was really the thing. That was the number one thing, was a goal to doing that. And then kind of the second, I think, part was just sharing my thought process in what I do for a living, and not necessarily looking to be, this content expert, but just more of the thought provoking of, hey, people look at things this way. Maybe you should look at it this way as well. And so that was the second part of that goal of what I wanted to accomplish.
I think the interesting thing is that as an entrepreneur, you're telling the story of your expertise.
Yeah.
And see, that's so often the important thing for, especially anyone that wants to do speaking, et cetera, to understand as an entrepreneur, they can put their information into a book and then they can use it almost as a very large business card.
Yes.
I know what I'm talking about. Here's the evidence right here.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, I'm sorry, go ahead, Deb.
No, please go ahead.
What's interesting about that is within the finance world, use the finance world and incorporate investing, insurance, real estate, lending, and taxes. When I say the finance world, people do that. But then at the same time, for me, it was like, well, who am I? Right. It was like, I'm this little guy, Bob Wolf, and there's this huge out there. Right. And there's people who write books and they're very well spoken. But for me, I didn't want to be a Robert Kiyosaki. Right. I don't want to be a Grant Cardone. I don't want to be a Tony Robbins. Right. They're all really good at what they do. Right. They're smart people, but I'm just little old me. And so for me, it wasn't an insecurity. It was, well, what do I have to say that's different? Right?
Yeah.
And I use one of your books as an example when I'm talking with people about writing a book, to give them, just to show the depth or breadth of ideas that are out there for how they can convey that knowledge. And in your first book, you told a story, and then you also took that story and turned it more into how-to. So that way someone could just choose to read that one part of the book if stories work better for them to learn versus if they think, oh, I don't want a story, I just want to get down to the brass tacks, so to speak. So I really liked how you had presented that idea, or presented those two ideas together.
And just going back to that, is so many people say the same thing. It's, how am I going to tell something different from the same old subject that we've all heard before? But everybody has a different perspective and they have different ways of sharing information. And I think that is where, especially if you see lots of books in a subject, obviously a lot of people are interested in it. So having multiple people talk in a different way is very helpful.
And that was the exact thing that going through that process for me in writing the book that became very relevant to me.
Right.
Was, oh, I actually have a voice and a
Right.
particular way I look at things. And it
Mhm.
actually was more self-confident, so
Yeah.
when you have a goal, you write it down, right? And not
Yeah.
only do you have a goal, you put a date on when you want to accomplish it, right?
Mhm.
And so that's what that book, Economic Termites, did. Was it did that. But I also didn't want to be like all the other books where someone could pick it off the shelf, read it, and go, cool. And then that was it.
Right.
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 I
There's a
wanted to be productive. I wanted to
right.
be useful. I wanted to be a solution or a potential solution. And that's why I wrote it in the 2 stages. Is let's one stage be a little more technical,
Mhm.
and let's look at the how-to, so to speak.
Right.
And then also, okay, well, what would this look like in a story form, as if we were to sit as a wallflower and
Right.
view an advisor and a client have a conversation about what just occurred
Yes.
in the technical aspect of
Right.
things,
Right.
and still keep it within a small book that wasn't overwhelming to where somebody reads a portion, sets it on the shelf, and never goes back to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I love about your book too. It's an easy read, very full of information, and you do a great job of defining things as well.
Oh, thank
So
you.
people can understand things better than they did before they started. So that's very helpful.
Yeah. And also the way your story and how you came to do the work you're doing now, as an asset coach and tax strategist, it's not just one part of that, but the way you
Right.
blend the different
Right.
modalities, or, the things that people need to know in
Mhm.
order to effectively plan for their futures, and the reasons why you had for, starting the business that you started are so important for people, because it's really serving them. It's serving your customers so much better,
Right.
than otherwise. So that's really great how that gets woven into the stories as well.
Yeah.
So yeah. So speaking about your business, how have you used a book to grow your business, to gain more credibility, to let more people know about what you do? Because I know a lot of people are curious about that question.
Hmm. So my side froze out a little bit. So I
Oh,
lost
okay.
gain. How do I use the book in gaining?
Yeah. How can a book be used to grow business, basically? And what are some of the ways to increase business sales through your book's publication? Because a lot of
Yeah.
people ask about that.
Yeah. So for what's interesting is that when you write a book, all of a sudden you become smarter, right? Nothing really changed, but all of a sudden you become smarter, because I think everybody deep down likes the idea of, well, I would like to write a story, or
Mhm.
we all have a creative mind to us, even
Right.
engineers. We all have a creative mind to us, and we'd like to be able to share that story. And when we're younger, we always have an imagination, we play, and then we get older. And so writing that book was part of, okay, let's create a little bit of credibility that I'm a published author. And the other aspect of it was a way to communicate to somebody, hey, just don't take my word for it. Just go read my book,
Right.
right? Go do it. You don't sit on a call with me feeling like you're being sold something, right?
Right.
Go read the book, figure out how
Yep.
the thought process works, which is why I think social media is such a great avenue, of whether it's YouTube or a podcast, which we have both of it. It's another avenue to
Right.
share our persona, our personality, and our philosophies of how we think about stuff. So
Mhm.
rather than giving client names and testimonials and why somebody would make a decision off a stranger's opinion,
Mhm.
right? Why don't you just go and listen? Go listen
Right.
to what we talk about, and how our viewpoint is. And if
Mhm.
you sit there and you go, man, this guy really, actually, he's speaking like right to me. There
Mhm.
you go. You don't need someone to say, go work with him. You just came to that realization yourself by doing the research yourself. So that book actually was designed for the credibility. It was also designed for someone to do the research and the due diligence on their own. And again, keep the book, keep the information very concise, small. So it wasn't something that they'd get through a portion of it, leave it on this table, and go off and do the rest of their life and forget about what caused them to want to read that book in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And kind of along those same lines of, a lot of would-be authors or future authors will ask that question that you just answered. So thank you for that. And what do you think authors could do in general, differently, to achieve more through the book publishing process? Like, is there anything that you go back and you think, oh, I learned this, or I want to have my material prepared this way, or anything like that that you would share with future authors?
For me was I didn't want to lose my personality in the writing, right? I wanted my personality to be the writing, right? Now I'm not the best spoken person, so I know what I speak doesn't necessarily transition to words that people read and absorb. So that's where you came in, Deb, where you were able to say, oh, Bob, I know what you're trying to say. How about saying it this way? It's like, oh yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. But I didn't lose my personality.
Mhm.
Right. And because at the end of the day, that's what people engage is, yeah, the information's great, but this person is greater. I'm engaged with that person. Right. And a book doesn't create that personality like we are right now. Right. You hear somebody, the tonality of their voice and how they talk and when they move their hands and facial expressions. So you can't get that in the book. But how do you get the best part of that personality in the writing, the black and white writing? And I think that's what I was so excited about at the end of Economic Termites. And then even into the second book, Farming Assets, was the personality still there. It's still me, even though I have you two as experts helping me in this certain aspect of getting it published, but I didn't lose myself. And that was important.
Yeah. And since you mentioned the two of us, I thought that would be a good time to ask about what do the three of us think are the essential qualities of an effective self-publishing team? And Bob, I'm just curious what you think, and then Becky and I can weigh in as well.
Yeah. Well, for me is exactly what I said before, is how do we clean up my speaking? Because I write as I speak, and I use gonna a lot and a lot. That's not necessarily real good English when you're trying to read it. And so, Deb, that was something that was really great. And that first step, right? I think the biggest thing for me was writing a book seemed so huge. It seemed like, okay, if I'm going to go build a house, that seemed like a big project. Where do I even start? Right. And that's where working with you was so helpful, is that we just created an outline. That was it. Just an outline. Let's keep you focused. Yeah, you got all this stuff in your head and you already visualize to see what the house looks like, but let's actually just draw it out. Let's actually see what it looks like on paper, and then we'll add color and we'll add all the other materials and stuff. And then that's what we did. We took that step of, okay, let's just do the outline. And then I was able to go through the outline and then actually fill it in. And that was actually very helpful for me. And I would highly recommend that to anybody who is now fiction, nonfiction, all that kind of stuff. Obviously, there's different approaches. We're just talking about what helped me. That was huge. And then the other aspect was, okay, now how do we make it look like this isn't the first time we've done this? Right? And so that's what was so exciting about Becky jumping on board and utilizing her design and her expertise and coloring and even the font design and how that would look and the importance of the front cover, the back cover, and the design of that, and the continuity from not just the covers, but the continuity on the inside of the book. That made me look like, okay, it's not just this little Bob Wolf who's writing this little book. It's, this is actually something that is meaningful, and it put color to the walls. It added nice window coverings. It was wonderful to be able to kind of see that finality of, wow, and to have family and friends see that and like, wow. No. I just did the words inside. All of that that was Becky and Deb.
That's a really good point. So many people will mention to me that they feel a little funny hiring an editor, a ghostwriter. I don't know if they say this as much with designers, but I know they do, because their words are their words and they feel a little funny, or almost like they shouldn't need to have an editor. And really, any kind of book is a team effort. When we go on Amazon or anywhere else that we buy our books, bookshop.com or AbeBooks, whatever it is, and we're looking at books, those books have been through many editors if they're from traditional publishers. And a lot of us don't know that. If we didn't work in the book industry or we haven't written a book before, it's all news to us that's even, we think, oh, we should be able to do it all ourselves.
It's not true.
That's how we were taught in school. Like, don't get help from people, don't ask people for answers and that kind of thing. So we were kind of trained that way. So then to be able to have a team can be very beneficial for the reasons that you state. And of course, Becky does an amazing job with her book designs.
Thank you. Well, I think working with you, Deb, and helping me understand, how he working and how having the information for 3 books, even though there's only 2 written, we've got 3 books coming in. So how is this? We want the big picture now, and having you be able to articulate that to me was very helpful. And going through and just Bob, just using we went to your branding of your business, even though we know it can be separate of its own. We wanted to have some similarities to what your business looks like, and that's where we got the base of the colors, and then we went from there. So it's all a good process.
Yeah, that leads me to wanting to know more about the evolution from moving from one book to this idea of a trilogy, which I think came up in conversation with the 3 of us sometime in the past several months. And we thought, hey, there's a trilogy here, I think that's how it came. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. But I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on that and how that idea and how it came to be?
Yeah. Well, the first hurdle was just doing the first one, right? And getting it done and having that accomplished and realizing it wasn't as painful as initially thought, right? Going through that process of, okay, that was the very basics, but there's so much more that we do actually in my planning and our firm that maybe I should dive a little bit deeper into more of an explanation of certain aspects. From economic termites, this was, okay, yeah, maybe there are, taxes, inflation, time, laws, and regulations. These are things that eat away at my wealth. Okay, well, how do I build wealth? We didn't talk about that in economic termites. We just talked about those termites that eat away at our wealth. So then it was like, okay, well, let's utilize the second book to talk about the different ways to build wealth, assets that are out there. And so, as you guys can tell, I like using analogies that are real world to people and utilizing those analogies to try to help explain what we're trying to communicate to somebody and make it a little simpler, not talk down, not talk over, but just talk directly to them. And so farming assets was that kind of that phrase, so to speak, because farming, we all know farming and being able to understand the different types of crops, it also equates the different types of assets and building wealth. And so that's really kind of what created that second book was, okay, let's share this. And then as we were going through that process of editing and design, and just having this dialogue with the 2 of you and being able to kind of talk out loud with people who this is their world, meaning you guys. And I sat there and said, well, it'd be really cool to kind of take an idea from the very first book where I was more technical, right, of how the very structure and technicality of it. And then I wrote a story of it. What if I wrote a third book that I kind of brought those 2 books together and said, okay, here's the end result of our planning from that, almost like a book of case studies, so to speak. Right. Okay, that sounds great. And this is what happened in a lot of, I'm an avid reader. I've read probably, I would say at least 1,000 books within business and finance and everything within it. And of course, my faith and personal development and stuff. And one thing that I always found very kind of leaving the book as, okay, that was good information, was the practicality of actually implementing that knowledge.
Yes.
Right.
I'm so excited about your third book. It's because it's I can't wait to read the stories that you're putting together of how that's all how this is all comes together into a final plan. So super exciting.
Yeah, no, for me, it's exciting. And so that's what the trilogy. And so as we were kind of joking around and talking about the design of the other 2 and it was like, ooh, let's create a trilogy. And we started making, I was joking with a lot of family and friends that, I'm writing a trilogy. And, once you read it, you're going to completely forget about Lord of the Rings. Right.
That's awesome.
So that was the evolution of it. And who knows, there may be a 4th, 5th, that I don't know. But right now, just from what we're doing, that's
Right.
kind of what created that thought process of hey, let's take it in steps. And each book is small, right? So it's bite size, and you don't need all three. You don't need to read all three of them. You can go right to the end of the choose your own adventure, but you're going to end up going through that and going, he's using terminology I'm not sure what I understand. You may end up going back to the other books as more reference of, oh, this is what he was talking about. Like when I talk about financial distributors, who the heck's that, right? So I'll talk about that in the third book, but I'm not going to explain what they are. So you'll probably have to go back to the first book and find out, oh, that's who they are.
Yeah. I was able to put these together. So let's see if I can make it quick.
Oh, okay. I'm going to remove myself and Becky, and then Bob, you're going to be here with your books alone for just a second. Hang on a second.
Pose?
There you go.
All right.
Yeah.
Didn't get it too well. Oh, well.
That's okay.
Nope. It was just me. I tried to smile and
oh dear.
Yeah.
All right. Well, anyway, we tried. But so let's see, did we talk through already the best well, I just want to share a piece of advice for authors. And then if anyone else wants to pipe in with something, that'd be great. But one of the things, and I'm picking up on something Bob was just talking about, but it was about the length of the book. And I was working with another author of mine, and she really loved it, that in a review of her book, they noted that the chapters were very easy to read. They were fluid, as one of the words that was used. And, that just reminded me so much how important it is to write a book that's easy for people to understand and to read, because people's brains are going in a million different directions all the time. So, so with that in mind, but is that necessary for your audience? I don't know. And so that's why I always start with an audience first approach to see who is your audience, how are they going to read a book? How are they going to engage with the material? And then that informs the structure of that material. So that's a really, it doesn't necessarily mean every book will have 8 chapters, 10 chapters, 12 chapters. There might be other ways of organizing the material that will be best for that particular audience. So that's something that's always useful for people to know if you're watching this, if you're thinking about writing a book one day, just keeping in mind who is your audience and how do they best consume information. And if you guys have something different that you want to share, I'd love to hear it.
Well, we've done quite a few books recently that have used QR codes. So it's another asset of putting that QR code in the book, which allows them to go to the videos and go to the different, whether it's YouTube or other that people have. Sometimes they're just lead magnets, so they're signing up for a newsletter. But it's one more way we can add information into your book to help your audience get additional information. So that's been pretty cool.
Yeah, no, that's actually really interesting, and that may be something we want to incorporate in the Asset Buddy system, because if it is going to be more case studies, we may need to do a little background, a little explanation of what we're doing, and something to that effect, having a voiceover. So if you're sitting there with the book with a QR code, everyone has their phone handy. You click on it, you listen to it, like, oh, okay. And then you keep on going, right? You click on the next one. So I can see that how it becomes a very active experience.
Yeah. And that's just exciting. Using technology in any way we can is a great way to make the book even more, a value to your clients and your audience.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to that, Deb, is knowing your audience, but also knowing your story. Right. The last thing, for example, Harry Potter's books, right? There's 600 pages. But if she cut it to 300, you'd be in the middle of the story. Right. Right. You got to finish the story. What's the point of a book is to tell the story. So, and that's, I see that a lot of times with YouTube and podcasts is that, well, you need to have it between 10 and 15 minutes. Right. But yet the most listened to podcast is Joe Rogan, and he's got 3-hour long.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. And so I think it's the story, it's the content, it's the information, it's not necessarily what the individual is looking, the viewer or the reader is getting out of it, but what you want to give to them as well. It's that relationship. It's we're both kind of coming in the middle to have this relationship of exchanging information and an experience.
Right.
Yeah, that's a great point. You definitely want to give what makes the most sense to give. And then also, and making sure that you include everything that they need. And a storytelling, using stories as a foundation of that is so important, because that keeps people's attention. They are memorable, so people learn long term what it is that you're trying to teach them. They have more of a chance of transforming, so that they sort of enter the world of Bob's book, maybe not understanding what it's all about, and then by the end they're a little bit different because they have this new understanding. And so most books of this variety are like that, where really the reader is going through a transformation of some kind.
Correct.
So, yeah. And so I want to share a couple links here. First is, this is where you can find out more about Bob and his work. So feel free to go to his website, terrafirmaconsultant.com. Becky has a self-publishing checklist in her website, beckysgraphicdesign.com. So if you're curious about self-publishing and you want to see what all the steps are, feel free to go there. And then I have a dream book readiness check. So if you're kind of wondering what your next step is, this is a little test or a quiz, but it's a friendly one. But it's only takes about 2 or 3 minutes to get through it, and it will give you solid next steps to take on your book. So feel free to make use of one of those resources. Go to Bob's website or get Becky's checklist or the Dream Book Launcher check. I'll just go back to Bob's website for now. Great. So one last thing I wanted to talk about, if we may, is in our previous interview, Bob, one that you and I did a while ago, you mentioned that you don't tend to feel fear. And I thought that was really interesting, because a lot of people feel fear around writing. It might come from something that happened way back in school, the red pen and so on. Can you share more about what you do to feel confident in your writing, especially?
Yeah, I think that it's over a period of time, right? I mean, when we were in high school, the number one fear of people is public speaking. Why? Is because they're worried about people are going to laugh at them, they're going to snicker at them, right? They're going to say jokes, and they probably are, or they may not. At the end of the day, it still doesn't change who you are. It still doesn't change your message. It still doesn't. And so I just learned at an early age, I was blessed to be able to be involved in more of a self-development, personal development, from when I hit 18 to as I got older, became more of an avid reader. That became more prevalent to me, is that, of course your mom's going to always love you, right? Your spouse is always going to love you. But at the end of the day, when there's only you and you're in a solitary room, it's just you. And do you love you? Right. And that was something that was really important to me. And I heard it in so many different ways and different avenues over the years. But it just became very important to me to say, hey, I am very confident in who I am. I'm not perfect, not acknowledging that I'm perfect. But the constant self-talk on myself, and just doing something, taking something like we're talking about so big, like writing a book, we're looking at the end results and we immediately think about all the negatives of what could happen and all these what ifs. Those are just exactly what they are. What ifs. It doesn't matter. It didn't happen. It's not reality. So how do I take this big thing and break it down to something very small? And that's why we talked about the outline, right? Just look at an outline. Let's kind of just jot down some notes. You don't even have to talk to Deb to do an outline. You just grab your piece of paper, grab your pen, and just say, what's the first thing I want to say? Write it down. It doesn't have to be perfect. And just starting. That was the biggest thing, just starting. And I think that's one of the things they talk about in creative writing classes. I never took it, but is just get started. Just let the consciousness flow. And that's such a lesson for life, right? Just allow your consciousness to flow, allow your life to flow. And as long as you're not doing things that are planning to kill people or hurt people or injure people, then flow, baby, flow, right?
I love that. Flow, baby, flow. And then what you said about loving yourself, I was like, 2 thumbs up. I love that. That sounds great. Yeah. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Are there any final words that you want to share, or anything else that you think we should ask Becky before we close out for today?
Yeah. So one of the things we had talked about, Deb, in the last interview, you brought up that I think is really important, especially if people haven't seen that one. So I think it's an important part of your process that really was very beneficial to me in the second book. Part of your process is to read the author's book out loud to the author. right? And at first I was like, all right, yeah, okay, I'm gonna sit here and I'm just gonna stare at the Zoom while Deb's reading to me, right? Here's story time. And it, and it actually was really good because it brought me to where I've read my book out loud and silently, but our brain already knows what's on the page.
Yes.
Right? I put it there. So my brain corrects things and whether the language is incorrect or the spelling's incorrect. We've seen all those tests before, those shirts or those things where things are misspelled and you can read it exactly, even though there's letters missing, right? The brain is able to do that. So what I loved about you reading to me, it gave both of us an opportunity to kind of hear it out loud. And we had some adjustments. We had some changes and some edits to make. And it was, and somebody who's a professional, right? Not just, hey, asking my wife or my kids to read the book to me, but someone, which probably I should do just to torture them. But I thought that was a very helpful process. And at the same time, like, man, thank goodness my book's smaller.
For me too, because I'm the one that read it. Yeah, it was funny because in the original interview, Bob's like, I can't believe, what was it? You said something really funny. You were like, I didn't want to do that, but I thought it was so cool that you gave it a try, even though you thought it was kind of a weird idea and that you were open to it. Because now look, now you're like, oh, this worked out really well. So kudos to you for being so open to trying something that you weren't sure about.
Well, and that's the lesson to life. And that's what you're talking about, fear. Is right, is that we build up these insecurities or these thoughts in our mind that something is going to be what it actually never is. It's actually a lot better than what we thought it to be. Right. And so and then that was a lot of fun. So being able to transition to working with Becky and looking at some of her creativity and even coming up with the trilogy
logo,
right?
Yes,
that'd be kind of cool if you had a separate logo that was separate from everything else. That was like, oh, that'd be cool. So I reached out to my team and we developed a logo that kind of made sense and kind of exciting to kind of link the three together. It's a small thing, but it was kind of big to us.
Right.
So like little things like that where, I wouldn't think of this, my team and I, and so going through this process and just being open to this is your guys' world. You tell me, all right? You're the boss, not me. And I'm just along for the ride and want to make sure it's the best ride we can all have. So,
yeah, that's awesome.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And what a wonderful way to close out with this bit of inspiration. I love it. So thank you so much for your time.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Bob.